Hello, today I'll be reading Chapter 7 of the Ballad of Lucy Whipple. Chapter 7, Winter 1850, in which I hunt for Rattlesnake Jake and have to eat my supper standing up. That winter was the coldest and wettest anyone could remember. Rain fell day after day on the tents and trees in the blacksmith shop, on the half-built wooden buildings and the piles of garbage in the street, on rabbit burrows and grizzly caves, on Indians and miners and shopkeepers, and on me. Creeks flooded, rivers overflowed their banks, sending tents and shacks floating down to the bay and out to sea. No one could work, no one could even walk without losing his boots in the deep, sticky mud. Our tents grew soaked during the day and froze in the cold each night. Pack trains stopped altogether, and we were dependent on what we could catch or find or borrow to eat. Sometimes I stood at the tent flap, just watching the downpour, thinking with great longing of the Massachusetts rain. Not icy needles like this, but big, soft drops that made quarter-sized spots on the dry ground. Big, juicy drops we caught on our tongues and swallowed to relieve our thirst. I'd stand there until my eyelashes grew heavy with frost, or one or the other of the boarders would grab the tent flap from my hand, shouting, "Dag babbit, little sister, it's so cold in here my britches is froze to my bum, pardon me altogether." The few miners who stayed over the winter spent their days and nights at the saloon until the whiskey ran out. Then they came back to the boarding house, and we got to know one another very well, for the cold rain kept us all inside a good deal of the time, working, telling stories, arguing, and complaining. One afternoon the rain washed in a curly-headed man from out east who'd gotten lost on his way from Downieville. He wore the miner's boots and flannels with a high black silk hat left over from his days as a dandy. He shaved every week and never spat indoors. We called him the Gent. The Gent was tall enough to break icicles off the tent poles to suck on, and he could play Orally, and I gave my love a penny on his fiddle, the first music heard in Lucky Diggins that wasn't provided by mules, jays, and the roaring of the river. Each night we huddled around the cook stove, trying to keep warm, and listened and sang and tapped our feet in time. "You know," Amos said when the Gent finished a particularly jolly "Sweet Betsy from Pike, there ain't nothing like a ballad on a rainy night." "What do you mean, ballad?" I asked. "Well, little sister, I'd say a ballad is a poem that tells a story of the extraordinary doings of ordinary folk. You can say ballads or sing 'em or just play their tunes for folks who know. I learned me lots of ballads in Texas. Tell us one, please." "You just sit back and listen, sis, and I'll tell you a good one. Imagine we're outside settin' round a fire of cow pies and dry grass. Before the fire it's so dark you couldn't find your nose with both hands, and there you sit looking at the moon through the neck of a bottle and listening to the coyotes sing when someone starts in tellin', 'This here's the ballad of Rattlesnake Jake, a man as mean as sin. He used barbed wire to comb his hair and gargled with straight gin. He picked his teeth with a bowie knife, he'd rob, he'd shoot, he'd kill. He pushed old ladies off of cliffs and babies down the hill.'" "Thunderation, what a villain!" Jimmy Whiskers cried as he threw a piece of pine wood into the stove. "If I ever catch up with him—" The Gent shushed him, and Jimmy sat back down again, scratching his belly as he listened. Amos Frog continued, "Till Sheriff Bueller came to town with Star of Shiny Tin. Said, 'I swear on my mother's grave I'm bringing that outlaw in.' So while the townfolk all raised hell, no one went to jail, for the sheriff was busy as bees in June following Rattlesnake's trail. He tracked him through the mountain snow and down the river he chased, till in a cabin dark as death the two came face to face. The sheriff stood in the cabin door, his eyes were mad and hot, but Jake was ready, cool as ice, and dropped him in one shot." Mamma had stopped sweeping and was leaning in her broom to listen, while Prairie had crawled onto my lap. I hardly noticed, so caught up was I in the tale of the villainous Rattlesnake Jake. I had assumed this was going to be just a story, but it sounded so real, as if Jake could be down any road or behind any tree. The bullet went plumb through the sheriff, as only bullets can, bounced off a bedpost made of iron and the miner's pick and pan. Clang went a kettle when the bullet struck, bouncing off with such a force. The chimney shook, a brick fell down and squashed the sheriff's horse. The skies grew dark, the wind blew fierce, and the bullet, as if beguiled, pierced the heart of a grizzly bear about to eat a child. When the posse caught up with the rattlesnake, Jake drawled with a sneer, "Sorry the sheriff got in the way. I was aiming for that bear." Jimmy jumped up. "That ain't so, the ding-dang liar. He was gunning for the sheriff all the time." I pulled his shirt and he sat down again. The deputy laughed like he didn't believe Jake was as bad as Nero, but the mother cried with tears in her eyes, "Oh, Jake, you's a hero!" So Jake went free to rob and kill with glee and no remorse, and he picked his teeth with his bowie knife and he rode out on his horse. So if you see around your camp a man with his eye on your stake, lock up your gold, your wife, your dog, it might be Rattlesnake Jake. "Whew!" said Jimmy Whiskers, slapping Amos on the back. "That story is taller than it is wide." He laughed and swung Prairie onto his shoulders, and they went to talk Mama into a piece or two of dried corn cake to hold them until breakfast. But I sat still as a stone wall. Dag-diggity, what if Rattlesnake Jake was real? What if he was one of our boarders? I started to laugh at the very idea when I thought of Mr. Coogan picking his teeth and scowling at me. What if Rattlesnake Jake was real, and he was our boarder, Mr. Coogan? "Listen," I said later to Butte, "I have long thought there is something curious about Mr. Coogan. He doesn't dig or wash for gold. He has no job, no store, no obvious prospects. He just walks around all day poking and prying, and at night sits and stares at his paper. I think he's up to no good. I think he could be Rattlesnake Jake." Butte was skeptical. Even I wasn't absolutely convinced until I realized that if the story were true, and if Rattlesnake Jake were real, and if he were an outlaw, then there was likely to be a reward for capturing him. And if Mr. Coogan were Rattlesnake Jake, and if I helped capture him, then the reward would be mine. I took to watching Mr. Coogan closely, but he did nothing more evil than eat and sleep and battle his way through the rain to the privy and back. When the rain eased a bit, he left the shelter of the boarding house and walked around the town. I followed along whenever I could get free. He carried his mysterious piece of paper folded up inside his hat and took it out now and then to read and chuckle over. Butte reckoned it was a map to a lost gold mine, but I was convinced it was a copy of the Ballad of Rattlesnake Jake. "Mama," I said finally, "we've got to send someone to Marysville for the sheriff. I think maybe Mr. Coogan is Rattlesnake Jake." "He is Percival Coogan, and no outlaw." "But, Mama, he seems very suspicious. He doesn't dig or hunt or gamble or drink. He walks around in the rain and mumbles to himself and doesn't talk to anybody. What is he doing here?" "He pays $18.20 a week, that's what he does. Don't pester the man." "But, Mama, nothing. Where do you get these notions? Go light a fire in the yard. We gotta boil these sheets before it starts to rain again." I kept on following Mr. Coogan, real and careful and sneaky-like to make sure neither he nor anyone else saw me. With all the rain, the diggings looked as if an army of pigs had rooted around there, and I slipped and squished in the mud. Everything looked so different, and I had to stay so far behind that several times I got lost and bumped into Mr. Coogan making his way back. I shivered all the way home. I followed him down to the river and back again, up onto the bluff and down again, into the woods and out again. Peeking through tent flaps, I saw him eyeing the gold dust in Mr. Scatter's money drawer, watching the card players in their bags of dust, snorting as liquor and money passed by him in the saloon, but gathered no evidence of evil deeds. "What's up, little sister?" asked the gent. "You look as worried as a duck in the desert." "It's Mr. Coogan. Don't you think it's suspicious, him being here all this time and doing nothing to make or spend money?" "Mighty strange, but no crime." "What if he's Rattlesnake Jake, and he waylays you on the way back to town, and leaves you to die with a bullet in your head and takes off with your gold?" "Now, little sister, the man hasn't done anything illegal. But keep watching. You may be a hero yet." I didn't want to be a hero, just wanted the reward. I knew I wasn't hero material, but Butte just might be. "Butte," I said early one morning, "if Mr. Coogan is indeed Rattlesnake Jake, we're in grave danger. Me and Prairie and golden-haired Sierra and your beloved Mama." I piled it on, and before he knew it, rain or no rain, he and Sweetheart were heading toward Rocky Bar for the deputy. Mama asked at supper, "Where's Butte, girl?" "Call me Lucy?" Mama frowned and said nothing. "He's helping French Pete tote some supplies to Rocky Bar. He'll be back tomorrow," I said, looking down at my lap. I was of the opinion that lying was a bad thing to do, and cautioned Prairie and Sierra always to tell the truth. But these were desperate circumstances, and money from Massachusetts was on the line. So I lied, but looked at my lap in preference to meeting Mama's eyes. The ugly boarder, who was probably Rattlesnake Jake, gave me his fishy, cold stare, but said nothing. By next morning, the rain had become a storm with thunder and lightning and a mighty wind that put me in the mind of the Swiss Family Robinson. Mr. Coogan put on his boots and his fur-lined coat with the beaver collar and went out anyway. I stayed behind to wait for the deputy, but neither the boarder nor Butte came back that day. The storm passed, and Butte and the deputy rode into town the next morning. Mr. Coogan had not come back. He never did come back. Seemed like he'd just wandered off into the storm, leaving his gear behind. The deputy, Amos Frog, Mr. Scadder, and the gent went out searching for him, but the rain had erased his trail, and they never saw hide nor tail of him. They figured he was lost in the storm and drowned or was eaten by a grizzly. I thought he had hightailed it after town after finding out that Butte had gone for the law. Butte got a scolding from Mama, but I got a licking. Tie down that imagination of yours and quit telling stories before you get someone into real trouble. I figured I had already gotten someone into real trouble. Me. I had to eat supper standing up. Guess his running away proves, I said to the gent who had decided to stay and try his luck in Lucky Diggins, that he really was Rattlesnake Jake. Could be, little sister, could be, but it don't always pay to go by appearances, said the gent, winking at me and then picking his teeth with his bowie knife. To this day I can't say for sure that Rattlesnake Jake was Mr. Coogan, but he could have been, or the gent, or anybody, or nobody, and I'll never know. Things like this that aren't true or false, right or wrong, really irritate me. And that's the end of chapter 7.